This is the Textnotes screencast for Langston Hughes, the poetry that I asked you to read this week. And so I've always been a fan of Langston Hughes. He was considered the poet laureate of the Harlem Renaissance, which is a time period of celebration of Black culture and Black history, resilience, hope for a better future during the 1920s. And so I've always just been a really big fan of his work, and I wanted to focus this week solely on Langston Hughes, as there's a lot that we can unpack from the poetry, the 4 poems that I asked you to read. So we're going to start with The Negro Speaks of Rivers. I've known rivers, ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood in human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. He lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and after he graduated from high school when he was 18, he took a trip by train to Mexico where his father was living, and he would live there with his father for a year. And as he was driving or traveling on this train, he crossed the Mississippi River and he's looking out the window. He's looking at the Mississippi River and he was really inspired by its beauty. And he was also reminded of the fact that the Mississippi River was a kind of a crucial um, resource in sustaining slavery in America. And so he flipped over a letter that he'd been writing and he penned this poem on the back. It's probably one of his most famous works, and it really celebrates the voice and the soul of the Black community, you know. And this was during a period of great racial intolerance, injustice, inequality, especially in the South. You know, where we had the Jim Crow laws and then rolling into the systemic racist mistreatment and the murders and everything else that were happening at the time period. So, a few years really after it was published, Hughes dedicated the poem to W.E.B. Du Bois, who was, among many things, the founder of the NAACP, and he fought tirelessly for racial equality in America. And Langston Hughes really idolized W.E.B. Du Bois and took a lot from his teachings and his movement there, the civil rights movement. So the poem itself stretches from the earliest moments of human civilization. Um, Rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins, which is stressing that Black people have been both witness and participant in key moments in human history, and they haven't simply only been present; they've been critical or crucial as a driving force to shape human civilization, shape America, and they have and across the world, and they have persevered all across time. And so our speaker here is an ancient one who has been around since the beginning of human civilization and is still present in current day. He has bathed in the Euphrates. So in the Middle East, there's an area called the Cradle of Civilization, which is kind of like the birthplace of human agriculture. He has built his hut near the Congo, which is in Africa. He has looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it there in Egypt. And he has heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. That was a journey that Lincoln took when he was a young adult, and he witnessed the evils of slavery, and it really brought about a lot of his championing of the the Emancipation Proclamation and the abolishment of slavery and his fight with that. And so he references these four rivers: the Euphrates, the Congo, the Nile, and the Mississippi, which ideally are also all rivers that are connected with slavery in some form. The use of slaves in agriculture. And farming and that kind of thing. In the Nile, they use slaves, both black and white, honestly, what Egyptian, to build the pyramids. Um, the Congo, the slave trade there, a lot of use of slaves when people were mining for diamonds and things like that there in the Congo. And then the Mississippi River, which rolls through the South, and it carried supplies and transported things that were critical for the way of life in the South, and so all these things are connected very much to Black identity and to slavery. The use of river, a river symbolizes continuity. They're ever flowing. They are not broken up by the land that they cross. As a matter of fact, a river will bend the landscape and shape the landscape in order to continue flowing. Rivers are also very deep. They're permanent, they're strong. And so he seems to be relating the strength and perseverance of Black people all throughout history to these rivers. And he says, my soul has grown deep like the rivers. It's not him, it's the Black experience as a whole. Okay, so continuing on with our second poem by Langston Hughes, Mother and Son, here for us. It says, well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time, I've been a climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps 'cause you find it's kinder hard. Don't you fall now, for I's still going, honey. I's still climbing, and life for me ain't been no crystal stairs. So, this is an extended metaphor. It's comparing life to a staircase, probably an allusion to the story of Jacob in the Bible, who dreamed of the stairway to heaven. And there's a lot of use of dialect in here, the drop in the G and climbing, landing, turning, and then also uh, the the just kind of the dialect of the African American people at the time period. So life is like a staircase. But for our mother in this poem, that climb hasn't been an easy one. It's not been a crystal stair, which we get kind of allusions to, like Cinderella going to the ball and she's on the crystal staircase and she loses her crystal slipper. This is no fairy tale. And she's not climbing and it's not an easy climb. Her climb has had tacks in it, which are little short, nail-like. Things that they put into carpet to kind of mount carpet to the floor. There's been splinters, and she's had boards torn up, and there's been bare places with no carpet on the floor. She's known poverty, she's known deprivation, but that turning point there, all the time she hasn't stopped. She's been a climbing and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So she's persevered even when it was hard and dark and scary. And she had given, she never gave up hope that there would be light again and that she could continue on her journey. In line 14, she addresses her son. This begins like that direct advice, and she says, So, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps because you find it's kind of hard. Don't you fall now. Our son may have been at a point in his life where he's ready to turn back, to give up, to go back down the stairs. But she encourages him to keep pushing forward, and she reminds him that she hasn't given up. She's still going. She's still climbing, even though life hasn't been a crystal stair. Okay, I too sing America. So, free verse poem here. I too sing America. I'm the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. So, this is a direct response to two of Walt Whitman's, who is kind of like the consummate American poet. His two poems, I Sing the Body Electric and I Hear America Singing, in which he pays tribute to the white Americans, the blue bloods who, the the workers of America, the people that have built the foundation for the country, and celebrating their kind of their Americanness, if you will. It's also kind of in direct response to one of Abraham Lincoln's most famous quotes: "A house divided against itself cannot stand," which had a lot to do with the African American condition and slavery and that kind of thing, right there before the breaking out of the Civil War here in America. So, from his first line, he's stating that black men, me, and as a larger whole, the African Americans, they're also worthy of being Americans, and they're worthy of celebrating or singing that um, the country, about the country that they helped to build. But he's the darker brother, right? He's not the white man. He's the darker brother. The one that has to eat in the kitchen when company comes, which is a pointed remark, really, on the rules of society, especially in the South in regards to black people. That whole separate but equal. You couldn't eat with white men. You couldn't use the same bathroom. All that stuff that's kind of happening there. Um, but he's undaunted. Like, even though there's these rules in place, he still laughs and he eats well and he grows strong. Um, and one day, tomorrow being, it could be literally the next day, but we know from history it wasn't literally the next day, but one day in the future he will be allowed to join the table, right? The table of life, and nobody will be able to deny him that right. He says, tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. And they'll also see how they here, being the white society, right, that they will see how beautiful he is, and be ashamed of the way that, of their treatment, their abuse, the racism, the injustices. He has just as much right to be there, and he'll continue to wait and hope and prepare for the day that he too can join the table. So I think that that's a very pointed um, poem about the hope and the perseverance, to keep that one day that things will be better and things will be equal and they will have those rights. But he too is America.